in a dense New Hampshire forest. A chilling discovery in 1985 would spark one of America's most complex and haunting cold cases. Inside a 55-gallon drum in Bear Brook State Park, investigators found the remains of an adult woman and a young girl. For 15 years, their identities remained a mystery. Then, in the year 2000, the case grew even darker. A second drum was found just 100 yards away, containing the remains of 2 more young girls. For victims nameless for decades, became known only as the Allenstown Four. Who were they, and who was responsible for this unimaginable act? The journey to answer these questions would push the boundaries of forensic science and unravel a web of deception spun by a killer who hid in plain sight. This is the story of how technology, relentless police work, and a bit of genetic luck finally brought their names back to light. The initial investigation was a frustrating dead end. The victims had been deceased for years, likely since the late 1970s or early 1980s, without names, faces, or even a clear timeline. The case quickly went cold. For years, the 4 victims were simply statistics in a cold case file. But as forensic science evolved, so did the hope for answers. The advent of DNA testing in the late 20th century provided the first major breakthrough. Investigators were able to determine that the adult woman was the mother of 2 of the children's, the oldest and youngest girls. However, the middle child was not related to her, adding another layer to the mystery. Who was this child, and how did she end up with this family? The DNA profiles were uploaded to national databases, but no matches were found. The silence continued, and the barrels in the woods of Bear Brook held their secrets tight. The key to unlocking the entire case would come from a man who was already dead. His name was Rea Rasmussen, but he rarely used it. He was a chameleon, a ghost who drifted through life under a series of stolen identities, including Bob Evans and Curtis Kimball. Rasmussen had a long and violent criminal history, but he was slippery, always managing to disappear before law enforcement could connect all the dots. He died in a California prison in 2010 while serving a sentence for another murder. At the time, no one knew he was the monster at the heart of the Bear Brook case. The connection was made years later thanks to a revolutionary new technique: forensic genetic genealogy. This method uses consumer DNA databases like those used for ancestry research to find relatives of an unknown person. In 2017, investigators took the killer's DNA, which they had preserved, and uploaded it to a public genealogy database. They weren't looking for him directly, but for anyone who shared his DNA, cousins, distant relatives, anyone who could help build a family tree and lead them to his true identity. The gamble paid off. Through painstaking work, genealogists and investigators pieced together his family history and unmasked him as Rea Rasmussen. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Not only did they have the killer's name, but they also made a shocking discovery. DNA confirmed that Rasmussen was the biological father of the unidentified middle child found in the second barrel. The puzzle was starting to come together. The killer wasn't just a random stranger. He was intimately connected to at least one of his victims. With Rasmussen identified as the killer, the focus shifted to identifying the 4 victims. Investigators now had a crucial piece of information. They were likely connected to Rasmussen during the period he was living in New Hampshire in the late 70s and early 80s under the alias Bob Evans. They revisited another cold case from that era: the 1981 disappearance of a woman named Denise Vaughn and her infant daughter. Rasmussen, as Bob Evans, had been her boyfriend at the time. He abandoned Denise's daughter in California years later, but Denise herself was never seen again. While Denise was not one of the Bear Brook victims, this link established Rasmussen's pattern of targeting women and children. The search for the Allenstown for intensified, using genetic genealogy again, this time on the victim's DNA. Investigators began building their family trees. In 2019, after more than 3 decades, 3 of the 4 victims finally had their names returned. The adult woman was identified as Marlyse Elizabeth Honey. The 2 children she was related to were her daughters, Marie Elizabeth Vaughn and Sarah Lynn McWaters. The family had disappeared from California in the late 1970s after Marlyse had an argument with her family. It was believed she left with a man named Rea Rasmussen. Finally, the narrative became clear. Marlyse and her 2 daughters had crossed paths with a predator, and their journey ended tragically in the woods of New Hampshire. It was a moment of profound sadness, but also of immense relief for their surviving relatives who had wondered about their fate for 40 years. The oldest mystery in New Hampshire's history was almost solved. But one question remained. Who was the 4th victim? The middle child? The biological daughter of the killer, Rea Rasmussen. For 5 more years, she remained nameless. Investigators knew who her father was, but the identity of her mother was a complete mystery, making it incredibly difficult to identify her. They released a new composite sketch and appealed to the public for help, but the trail went cold once again. The little girl, who was found with Marlyse Marie and Sarah, was the last ghost of Bear Brook. The final piece of the puzzle was agonizingly out of reach. Was her mother, another one of Rasmussen's victims, lost to time like Denise Beaudin? The investigation continued, driven by the promise that every victim deserves a name. Then, in September 2025, the final answer came after an exhaustive search that combined advanced genetic genealogy, deep dive documentary research, and a final DNA confirmation. The New Hampshire State Police and the DNA Doe Project announced the last victim's identity. The middle child was Rea Rasmussen, born in California in 1976. Her mother was a woman named Pepper Reed, who had vanished from the late 1970s, and is now also presumed to be a victim of Rea Rasmussen. Rea's identification was the culmination of over 40 years of tireless effort, a testament to the investigators who never gave up. The story of the Allenstown 4 had finally reached its conclusion. All 4 victims, Marlyse, Marie, Sarah, and now Rea, could be remembered not for how they died, but for the lives they lived. The Bear Brook case is more than just a chilling true crime story. It's a landmark case that demonstrates the incredible power of forensic science to solve the unsolvable. Genetic genealogy, a tool that didn't even exist when the investigation began, was the key that unlocked everything. It gave a name to a killer, and most importantly, it gave names back to his victims.